Hi there, welcome back to this series on React. In the last video, we talked about JSX and we looked at how to implement JSX. In this video, we're talking about components and props and how to implement components and props. Now, before we look at that, if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please do so by clicking on the subscribe button and also turn on the bell icon so that each time I release content, you get notified. Now, what are components? Components are self-defined units that contain both UI templates and UI logic, and they are reusable. Props, on the other hand, are ways of passing data to components. Props can also be said to be attributes of components. Now, let's look at how to create a component. So right here, I have a Learn React application we created from our last video. So what I'm going to do right there is create a new file. So I'm going to click on the plus icon right there to add a new file. And I'm going to name this file example_components_prop.html. And what I'm going to do right there is I'm going to go back to example_JSX, Ctrl A, elite, back to example_component.prop, paste the HTML right there. What I'm going to do right here is I'm going to do some cleanup. So right within the script tag, let's delete the constant name Henry and constant name template, and also the reference within the parent temp. We have the temp right there. Let's take out the temp variable right there as well too, the curly bracket. Now let's look at how to create a component. So just below the root element ELE reference, I'm going to define a component. Now, to define a component, we define a component using functions. So components are basically functions. So I'm going to have the function keyword and my component name. So the very first letter should be capital. So I'm going to call this fancy button, and right within the body of the function, so my curly bracket, I'm going to return a button. So a simple button, and the text of the button would be click me. So click me. Now let's make reference to a fancy button. So just within the parent temp, to make reference to the components, reference them like tags. So I'm going to have the angular brackets, and right in there, let's have fancy button. I save this and open this in my browser. So right here, I have the output. So you can see I have just learning JSX. I also have click me. That's the component right there. So back to the HTML. So just learning JSX, let's have this as just learning components. Okay. And of course, we can include some more reference to this. So this is what makes components reusable, the fact that we can reuse components. So I'm going to copy that, paste that 2 times. So that's twice. So I have 3 components. If I save that down, go back to my browser, you can see that I have 3 buttons. Click me, click me, click me. So we can obviously reuse our component. Now this component is named fancy button, so it could be very fancy. So let's make this fancy. Let's add some style to this button to make it very fancy. So back to my HTML. What I'm going to do right there is I'm going to give this component fancy button. So let's go back to the component, and where we have the button tag, let's give this a class. So in React, we don't use class. Instead, we use class name. So class name, not class. You can see it's camel case class, then capital N. The class I'm going to give right there, I'm going to give a class name of BTN. Of course, you can have multiple class name right there. Just have a space and list them out right there. So class name BTN. And what I'm going to do right there is define this style. So I'm going to go to the head tag, just below the title tag. Let's have the style tag right there. And let's select that. So .btn, curly bracket. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the borders. So let's have border, and I'm going to unset that. So border value unset. Let's also have padding. So padding. So padding. Let's have .7 rem. Then also let's also have margin. Let's give our button some margin. So margin. Let's have .6 rem, and that will do. Alright, so if I save this down back to my browser, you can see that what I have is I have the buttons, click me, and it works pretty fine. The next thing we'll do right there is we want to define some props for our components. And I have this component and I want my component to have different background colors or different name. So if you're looking at changing the properties of your component, then you should define props. So let's look at how to do that. So back to our HTML code, what we're going to do right there is we're going to go back to the fancy button component and let's define a props parameter. And what I'm going to do right there is give this button, so the button tag, the style attribute, so style, right there we can define the style. And the style we define right there would be an object, not the usual style in quotes. So for HTML, of course, we have the style in quotes, then right there you pass in the style, color, then column, then the actual value. In React, what you pass in is an object, and the properties usually are camel case. So background dash color would now be background color camel case. So let's look at how that works quickly. So what I'm going to do right there is let's just see. So I'm going to have my curly bracket within the outer curly bracket. Of course, this signifies an object, and I'm going to have background column, so background color, and let's have column, then in double quotes we can have red as a value. Now let's save this and let's just go back. So back to the RP, you can see that we've changed the background color. So of course you can add more properties, like for example, let's have a comma, let's have color, column, and we can have this as white. And if I save this now, back right there, you can see what I have is I have white. Alright, so now let's look at how the user can actually change, or whoever will use these components can actually change the properties. So you can change the color, you can change the background color. Let's look at how that works. So back right here, what I could do is just at the very top, fancy button, we'll define a variable. So let's have variable, let's have a constant, and I'm going to have this as styles equal to, now let's copy, so just where we have style, I'm going to copy the object inside the curly bracket, okay, paste it, so at the very top, constant styles, paste it right there, and style should be equal to curly bracket, we have styles, right? Okay, so background color red, color white. So background color, we can have a default color, so red. So if the user doesn't supply the background color, we can have a default color for red, or we can have this property to be mandatory. So what I'm going to do right there is let's have a default color. So we're going to have red as default color. So we're going to do this. So take out the red and let's have props. So props dot, let's have background color. So props dot background color. So we're going to check first. So check if that exists. If background color, so the user supplies background color, then we're going to have background color. Otherwise, then let's have a default value of red. The same thing also we'll do for column. The default value right there is white. So if the user supplies, so we're gonna have prop, so props dot column. So if we have that, then what we're gonna do right there is we have that, then let's have props dot color. Otherwise, let's have white. So that's it. So we save this back and we should have the same thing. So back to the HTML, the fancy button, very first reference, fancy button. What I'm going to do right there, let me specify that background color be green. So we can do background color. So we specify this as an attribute. So we pass in values to that component by specifying the prop name as an attribute name. So background color will be equal to, let's have this as green, and the color, let's give the color as well. So add color property, and I'm going to have this as, let's do blue. Okay, now for the very second one, what we'll do right there is let's give it a background color blue. The very last one, let's leave it the way it is. Alright, so let's look at what we have so far. So right click, open live server, You can see, or do a refresh, you can see that what I have is I have those components, and I have the green one, the blue one, and the red one. This works pretty fine. So let's go back to our code and let's make some modifications. So back right here, now this looks very okay, but I want to do some cleanup. So you can see that this looks a bit messy and uneasy to read. So what I want to do right there is just pull the styles variable. So let's have constant, and I'm going to call this variable called bg column. Okay, and what I want to do right there is in styles, I'm going to cut out the props, background color, then the question mark, so all the way to red, column red. So cut that out, paste that where you have the bg column, assign that to that. Then back to styles, we can make reference to bg column. So I'll do the same for color, so just below the bg color. Fine, so let's have constant, and we can have color equal to, then also back right here, you can cut out the value, so props of color, question mark, props of color, column white, cut that out, paste that in color, and I'll make reference to, so we have color, column, then of course our constant color. Alright, so let's confirm if this works fine. So I'm going to go back to my browser, and you can see I have the same output. Alright, so this has been very insightful. I hope you learned something amazing about components and prop. The next video we'll be looking at how to work with states. Please stay tuned.